what is going on in the streets, it's important for us to understand that we are facing a significant issue. This is a change election. We also have the opportunity right now to radically reform and change America by doing so, what I am calling what is a third Reconstruction. 1865 to 1877 was the first Reconstruction, which followed the Civil War. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, all these gains made by African Americans. Freedmen's Bureau was created. And so you had African Americans who were elected to state legislatures all across the country, who then began to put in place policies dealing with education and economics. All these things began to happen. Yet it was the election of 1876 that changed it all. It was that election that was a contested election that led to the Great Compromise of 1877, which then, well, the South asked for the federal troops to be pulled out of 3 remaining southern states. That decision ushered in 92 years of Jim Crow. Then, of course, you had Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, Emmett Till being killed, lynched in August 28th, 1955. December 1st, 1955, you then had Rosa Parks making her stand happening there in Montgomery, and what then took place, 381-day boycott, kicking off the modern Black freedom movement that lasted 13 years, going through the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. We have seen Jenna 6, we've seen Trayvon Martin, we've seen all of these cases. We've seen, of course, Eric Garner, John Crawford III, Mike Brown, Rekia Boyd, Aiyana Jones. We can go on and on and on. To this year, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and of course, George Floyd. Now we're seeing changes happen over the last 3 weeks, changes that are actually real. But what more can be done? The brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha reached out to me and said, let's have a brotherhood conversation. I said, let's extend it to the country and to the world. And so we have a fantastic panel lined up to have this discussion. I'm going to introduce them again. Reverend Dr. William Barber, Repairs of the Breach. They, of course, are planning the Poor People's Campaign they're going to have the digital gathering taking place this Saturday and Sunday. Out of Dallas, Reverend Frederick Douglass Haynes III, Friendship West Baptist Church. PHILLIP AGNEW knows the issue very well of Trayvon Martin when, of course, he was one of the co-founders of the Dream Defenders there in Florida. Also, Congressman Bobby Scott, one of our strongest advocates for criminal justice reform on Capitol Hill. Mayor Sylvester Turner of Houston, of course, where George Floyd is from, and he spoke at the funeral talking about, of course, the changes they're putting in place via executive order. Also, Dr. Greg Carr, Chair, Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University, frequent panelist right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Also joining us is actor and activist Hill Harper. And, of course, we also have the president of Alpha Phi Alpha, Dr. Everett Ward, and then we also have the executive director joining us, Joe Paul. I want to first kick this thing off with Congressman Bobby Scott. Congressman, today, Donald Trump stands in the Rose Garden. He's sitting here touting and talking about, this executive order. But the reality is it was more hot air as opposed to really being substantive. Do you actually believe that you're going to see anything substantive come out of what Senator Tim Scott is doing there in the Senate?
Well, we've seen the difference in how you hold police accountable. We need to make sure that we hold them accountable, and we're taking advantage of this moment in time when people are absolutely frustrated, they're protesting. And rather than just add to the protests, we've come up with legislation that prohibits chokeholds, no-knock warrants, and has national standards, at least minimum national standards for policing, collects data, and makes it much easier to hold police accountable for misconduct. We believe we can pass that. As a matter of fact, in the House, we have more than enough co-sponsors to pass the bill. And so rather than talk about the problem and complain, we've come up with legislation that can actually make a difference. And so, Roland, I appreciate you're making it possible for us to come together to discuss this. This is in the middle of a health pandemic, in the middle of an economic pandemic, and we're dealing with the police misconduct in a way that I think will make a lasting difference in being able to hold police accountable. Let me just add one thing to this, because it hadn't been mentioned very often, and that is, so long as we're being policed from people that are outside of the community, we're going to have a problem. We need young people from the community that grew up in the community, went to high school in the community, to join the police force so that we'll be policed by people from the community. And I think that would make a difference. But in the meanwhile, we're going to pass legislation to hold police accountable for misconduct.
Mayor Sylvester Turner, at George Floyd's funeral, you spoke about signing an executive order. Congress obviously has a role, but the reality is this here. The reality is most police departments are governed locally. So the role of mayors and city councils and city managers really important as well. And so we don't have the mayor on yet, so I want to be sure to let me know as soon as he's on, so I can go to him. And that's an important point, Dr. Haynes, because again, we can demand change from Washington, but we need people to be thinking about city hall, county government, school district, state legislature, while folks are also focusing on Congress.
No question. And so that is why here in Dallas, we've come up with a 10-point or 10 demands that we have listed for both the city manager and the mayor to address. We're calling upon basically the dismantling of what has been a policing system that has not worked. Don't forget, I'm in Dallas, which is the city where both of them lost his life. And I could call the roll of the many Black people who have lost because of this policing system that is rooted, of course, in the slave patrol. So we are basically calling, along with those around the nation, for the defunding, the dismantling of our policing system, and then calling upon our civic leadership to join us in reimagining and envisioning what public safety should look like, because policing was never about serving and protecting a people who were criminalized and then demonized, otherized as threats. And so since we were seen as threats, of course, serving and protect, that occurs on the north side of town, where those who are white with money live, but then we are seen as threats on the southern side of town. And so it's very important that locally we engage in the kind of activism that presents demands that will both dismantle what has been and then develop what ought to be. Roland, I never will forget your speech at the Baltimore Alphas Convention, where you challenged us. You said we used to brag about running the yard on our respective campuses. Now we are grown, amen. The question is, are you grown enough to run your city, to run your state, to run this country? And that's why, again, in Dallas, we made up our minds. We're going to run this thing. And so we've given 10 demands to our leadership to respond to. And the bottom line is, if they don't respond to our 10 demands, then they're going to experience continued pressure, because again, it's all about running our local city.
PHILLIP Agnew, when you co-founded the Dream Defenders, y'all were focused on the state capitol, marching to Tallahassee. And people talk about, well, I don't know why people still protest. That stuff don't work. But the reality is we are seeing exactly what happens when you actually protest. Protest and policy are combined. You can't have one without the other, because one actually makes the other even stronger.
No, absolutely agree. One, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you, brothers. And to follow Brother Haynes, you know, for us, we've realized over and over and over in these moments, whether it be 2012, whether it be preceding that with Troy Davis or Gina Six, that it is our protest, which is our card, right? That we are able to use, that is actually able to draw the attention to the material issues that are affecting people's lives. Now, we've tried a whole host of other things. Dream Defenders now has existed for 8 years. And so we've moved policy, we've endorsed candidates, we've done candidate forums, we have authored policy. We've done all manner of different things that the democracy that we live under has afforded to its citizenry. But it is protest that has been singularly our most powerful weapon, because it is that unrest, it is the people being untenable and ungovernable that actually moves who really has power in this country. And I want to get to that really quickly. Capital the people who have money and wealth in this country actually are quite afraid of chaos. They love predictability. They claim to love disruptors, but they actually love predictability. And so it is our protest, right? The belief that potentially the people, in response to a policy or brutality, are going to do something that throws off the pattern under which your city is run, is actually one of our most key things. And it opens up the door. What we've seen in the last 3 weeks, Brother Martin, is not policy that was ushered or written in the last 2 hours and scribbled on a piece of paper and handed. Many times these were grassroots organizations that were working for sometimes 10 years to get this policy heard on the desk, to have it the light of day. And the protest was what ushered in and catalyzed a lot of these things being signed. And so I think it's an indispensable tool that we've got to use in this moment. And I think it should continue because it really is the only thing that people listen to.
Dr. Barber, you have been constantly talking about mobilize, organize, teaching, training. And one of the things that I have always said, one of the most underappreciated things about the Black freedom movement is that we spend all of our time talking about this Dr. King's speech and this event, but it was the strategizing, it was the planning, it was the plotting, it was understanding what we target, it was understanding how do we teach people. And I believe that brothers hit me all the time who say, man, I don't understand, because not understanding civics, not understanding the role that that particular person plays in this place and what this person does over here. And so we must, and I've advocated, we must take our fraternity infrastructure, which Dr. King spoke of specifically in Chaos or Community, Where Do We Go From Here, when he said there are 4 institutions that will free Black America: the church, the Black press, Negro fraternities and sororities, and he said Black professional organizations. We've got massive infrastructure that's going untapped.
None of our organizations were created to go along to get along. None of our organizations were created to accept the status quo. The worst thing that can happen to them, Black church, Negro fraternal, as he said, Black fraternal organization, is to decide that our job is to go along just to get along. All of them were created in times of trouble and transition and the need for transformation. You know, Roland, we've been talking about this third Reconstruction. I actually wrote a book about it. And it came out of the Moral Monday movement when I talked about the third Reconstruction would require some of the things we had in the first Reconstruction and the second. Number one, it would require an all-out fight for voting rights, because people will, the power structure, the capital, as Philip said, will always fight against participation in the democracy. They don't want a genuine democracy. They want a paid-for and bought democracy. It also requires that that we expand the battle. When Rosa Parks saw Emmett Till's mutilated picture in Jet magazine, she didn't say, I'm just gonna go after the people that killed him. She said it's time for all of the people that have been organizing in Montgomery, including white people and Jewish people, we don't talk about that often, that have been organizing for years, to go after the system of Jim Crow. And then to create a whole different set of policies, but to challenge the very system of Jim Crow. You know, in this moment that we're in, it is important for us to talk about police violence, but I'm going to say something that at first might be heard wrong, but I hope it'll be heard right. It is dangerous for us to limit racism to police violence. It is dangerous for us to see all this movement in the street and all we ask for is moderate bills. Even a white man named William Lloyd Garrison in slavery said, go tell a woman whose child is being burnt in a house to be moderate, but don't tell me to be moderate when it comes to disbanding the system of slavery. If we're gonna deal with death in this moment, police violence is killing. But we also know that Black folk are dying from the lack of insurance. That Black people are dying because our people are working during this COVID. That's why they're dying. We're dying because we're working with no health insurance, no living wage, no sick leave, no unemployment, no rent forgiveness, and no guarantee that the waters can't be cut off. 61% of African Americans are poor and low wealth, and 700 people are dying a day from poverty. This was before COVID. And so the reality is, Roland, we have to take this infrastructure, and we don't ever want them to be predictable to the other power structure. They would actually like us to just focus on one thing. That's why Trump went in the Rose Garden Day. He wants to isolate one thing, then conflate the protesters. And I don't even like protesters versus peaceful. And it's not that it's nonviolent versus violent. That's the language that King used. We can't allow that because the system is violent. And when you're dealing with a violent system, then you need all of your infrastructure, everybody, to be pushing against that and using it in what we call moral analysis, moral action, moral agenda, and moral agitation. Tell me one time in this country when we've ever seen any massive transformation without agitation. I actually think, Bobby, Brother Scott, that you all should do both. I think the folk inside the Congress ought to write the bill and then sit down one day and make them arrest you in the Congress, or do something of that nature to let people know that you are trying to pass bills that are in line with what the street demands. Because the worst thing we could do right now is pass bills that don't live up to the cries and the tears in the street. Secondly, the last thing we could do is not recognize that every mass movement has always been multiracial. I hate it when the media says, oh, we've never seen this before. Abolition, the civil rights movement, all of those movements happened when Black and white people and other people of conscience came together and saw racism as a target to Black people, but a threat to humanity and the very democracy we live in.
Dr. Greg Carr, I have long maintained, again, when we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about like all these pieces that we have here, when you talk about alphas and omegas, kappas, sigmas, iotas, 100 Black men, you talk about Prince Hall Masons, you talk about the Guardsmen, you talk about Sigma Pi Phi, the Boule, you talk about churches and black men's groups, and I mean we could just go on and on and on. This, to me, this is the moment when America, but specifically Black America, must see those brothers in their colors, in their regalia, at these protests, or even leading and launching their own. But not just that, these brothers saying, okay, alphas, we gonna hit the school board in August. Kappas, we gonna hit the school board in September. Omegas, we gonna take October. And then the Masons say, we gonna take November. We've got all this infrastructure, and look, I'm in 3 of them. Alpha Phi Alpha the longest, Boule, Prince Hall Masons, and I'm like, why have infrastructure if it's not activated externally beyond our own individual things?
That's right, brother. Of course, you're right. I'm glad to be here tonight with the brethren, and you're absolutely right. Individuals don't defeat institutions. Yeah, I'm in 2 of those 3, not quite Sigma Pi Phi, but Prince Hall and Alpha Phi Alpha for sure. And who else was Prince Hall Mason? Was William David Chappelle, Dave Chappelle's great grandfather, as he talked about the other night. He led a delegation of the African Methodists to confront that white nationalist Woodrow Wilson in 1918, and you're able to do that, and they were actually there to protest lynching. They you don't do that as an individual. Our dear brother Reverend Dr. Barber is absolutely right. We're operating in a field of violence. This is structural violence, and you don't defeat structures with individual effort. I think our beloved fraternity, the fraternities and sororities, the organizations that we have created to help us withstand and endure, these organizations will either join or get left behind. Because another thing Dave said was, the people in the streets. So if we're not in the streets, then we will we won't be able to exercise the authority of our experience. I mean, we sit here, Juneteenth coming up this weekend, and we think about what Alpha has done in the past. One of our former general presidents, Antonio Maceo Smith, that brother revived the spirit of Juneteenth in the 30s in Dallas, right there with our dear brother, Reverend Dr. Haynes. I mean, you know, but not only did he do that, he was the animating force behind the voting rights case. We heard Dr. Barber talk about that, Smith versus All Right. He was an animating force in getting folks together to fight Sweat versus Painter. You know, one of our other frat brothers, one of my mentors, the great Jacob Carruthers out of Phillips Wheatley High School in Houston there, involved in that. But this was at a time, the 30s, the 40s, and before the 50s, the 60s, when our fraternities and sororities were shoulder to shoulder with those who never stepped foot inside of a university. You know, when Alpha's put together, you know, go to high school, go to college, you know, this was for folks who had not yet been in a position where they could join an organization like that. And the only reason our organizations exist is to do this work. So when we look at a George Floyd, you know, when we see a Breonna Taylor, when we see an Ahmaud Arbery, when we see the fact that George Floyd went to Jack Yates High School, your alma mater, Jack Yates in 1872, coming out of enslavement, put that money together to buy what became Emancipation Park to celebrate Juneteenth. What we understand is the Black church, the Black organizations were and remain the foundation out of which we fight, out of which we win. And finally, I'll say this, listening to my brother Agnew, brother Philip Agnew, you know, this, what looks like a spontaneous general strike against the social order, and that's what we're in right now, another one. You know, in this field of violence, we always have these general strikes against state violence. The greatest perpetrator of violence, as Dr. King said, is this government in the world. But as we see these general strikes, what usually happens is what emerges out of those general strikes are those organizations, as Brother Philip said, that have been doing this work all along. And as folks who come out into the spontaneity of the moment begin to look for what we want to do, the agenda is advanced in the streets by those who have been organizing all along. And then Brother Scott now has a floor under him to go and wage war in the federal legislature and said, I want this, and everybody else out there wants it too. So if Alpha is not going to step up now, then Alpha will be a participant in observing this unstoppable flood. But I think, and that we all know that Alpha Phi Alpha is going to be there. And that's why we're on this call tonight. So I'm just grateful to be with you, brothers.
Hill Harper,
in this conversation.
Hill Harper, W.B. Du Bois wrote this book. Go to my iPad, Black Reconstruction in America, 1860 to 1880. That's important because if one reads that book, a very large book, you read that book, they begin to understand that the fight during Reconstruction was not free slaves just sort of sitting back and watching white legislators in Congress and state capitals be benevolent when it came to passing legislation. No, what happened was there were white abolitionists who came down south, as broken down by James D. Anderson in The Education of Blacks, 1860 to 1935, where they said, oh, let's go, we need to go help these illiterate black folks. They got here and realized that free slaves had already opened schools, and they were like, we wasn't waiting on y'all. What happened was black folks were active participants when it came to Reconstruction. 10,000 black newspapers were created, even with the literacy rate being so high. And then, of course, what was happening in state capitals, passing laws. This is the moment. This is the moment, Hill, where we take all of this knowledge, all of these resources, 8, 9 black cable networks, websites. We've got all of these pieces sitting here, and this is when it needs to be unleashed to be able to drive our people to begin to make these changes.
Yes. But I'll tell you, I'm about to probably say something that the folks...
Go ahead. That's fine.
The folks don't want to hear. Here's the deal. You already mentioned it, Roland, about being out-strategized. And I'll tell a story. I was in the classroom with my mentor, Professor Charles Ogletree, when I was a student at Harvard Law School, and he was teaching me. And I always, every day, I got into a fight with another student there named Berenson. And Berenson and I would battle over ideology. We'd battle over, he was an ultra-conservative guy. And afterwards, though, we'd speak, cordially. And although we disagreed, and he'd always tell me, hey, man, I got to go into Boston to go to a meeting. I'd be like, what meeting? What meeting are you going to? Oh, it's a couple groups I join. One Heritage Foundation. I go to those planning meetings. I'll go to another forum. I go to another one. He said I go to about 3 of them a week. I said 3 of them a week. what are y'all planning? Well, we're just, we're talking about trying to figure some things out. And when you think about this, everything that we're seeing, every martyr that we're making on a daily, seemingly a daily basis, is a direct result of us being out strategized and out planned by people who have completely antithetical views that we have and completely disregard our humanity. And the other problem is that you talk about all these institutions. I'm a member of the Boule as well. And I go to that Manhattan Boule meeting and I'm looking around this table full of the smartest brothers, most powerful brothers that you've ever seen. And I'm saying, well, how come we're not seeding in new talent? Where are the young cats? They need to be in the room. And part of the problem with many of our institutions, whether you're talking about the Urban League, NAACP, Rainbow Push, On Deck, I love everybody in the leadership, but seeding talent and bringing new people in is not something we like to do. Why? Because so many of us want to be the chief. And we want to remain being the chief so long that it actually starts to hurt the idea of mass impact. And it's like a farm system. If you don't bring new people in and actually teach them how to lead the organization begins to die and it gets cut off from younger voices. And it's not about age. It's about actually giving open access and saying, I want you to take over this leadership position. I want to cede this to you. And we haven't done that historically. And we're seeing the result of that.
Folks, be sure to let Mayor Sylvester turn into the Zoom. He's been trying to get in, and let me know when he's here. Is he here? Okay, Mayor Turner is in. All right, glad to have you here, Mayor Turner. And again, for all the folks who are watching, I just want you to understand all these are alpha men. There were other brothers who wanted to be here, Dr. Cornel West, Amari Hardwick, but they had commitments. And Dr. Everett Ward, you see in the top left corner, he hit me up along with Executive Director John Paul, say, hey, we want to do something for the Brotherhood. I said, well, I got my own platform, so let's actually open this thing up to the public. Because this should be a call to arms, not just for alphas, but every fraternity, every sorority, every African American, all of them. In fact, the mayor is in, y'all. He's in the bottom right-hand corner. That's Mayor Sylvester Turner. No, Chiron says Jeff, but that's actually Mayor Turner. So this is about challenging. This is about getting black men to be involved in what's happening. Mayor Turner, you spoke at the funeral of George Floyd. You talked about ushering in the executive order. What I've said to people is that, we can sit here and say, man, what's the CBC doing on a federal bill? But the reality is you're the mayor. You actually have more control over the Houston Police Department than any member of Congress who's from Houston. And so what do you want to see black men, alphas and others doing to drive this change that we're seeing happening across the country to make it even more significant so that these police departments and cities are responsive to the constituents?
Thanks, Brother Roland, for having me. And let me thank you for what you have done and continue to do. Look, I would tell you, this is a moment when we all have to be engaged and operate with that sense of urgency. We have listened to the marchers, the demonstrators, and I want to thank them for making it uncomfortable for all of us in positions of leadership. And that's why the very next day after George Floyd's funeral here in Houston, I signed the executive order implementing almost all of the 8 can't wait plus more, and saying that this is the way it will be in the city of Houston from this day forward. And that is requiring people to intervene, police officers to intervene when they see people violating the policy, breaking the laws, de-escalation, giving a verbal warning before utilizing deadly force where possible, fully reporting off every use of deadly force to the Independent Police Oversight Committee, de-escalation, all of those things are included, and it became effective the very moment that I signed it, and almost all of our city council members joined in as well. Now that's the beginning. That's not the ending. At the same time, I put forth a task force that would be citizen-driven to review our own Independent Police Oversight Board to see how it can be strengthened to bring about even greater accountability So there are a number of things that we are doing here locally. But what I will say, even though we're doing these things locally, what happens in Minneapolis or Atlanta or St. Paul or any other city, when there's police abuse or brutality that's taking place, it's as if it has taken place right here at the city of Houston. So we need national standards, national requirements. And so it's just a point in time for alphas and everybody else to remain engaged, to listen. I told one of my members of City Council today, as we review our policies, practices, and procedures, everything is on the table. I'm not eliminating anything from the beginning. Everything is on this table. Let's take a look at it. And then I've said to people in the business community last week, when people are talking about defunding police, and from my take, what they are saying, place your priorities in these communities and neighborhoods that have been underserved and under-resourced for decades. Don't just spend money to police and incarcerate, but invest in these communities. And the more you invest in these communities and lift these neighborhoods up, then you won't have to spend nearly as much on policing. So that's just from this vantage point, but we've got to lock arms. We're all in this together, and it's not one and done. And it's going to be a continuous, ongoing battle. So let me thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for convening this. And I apologize for
it's all good
not being able to get in at the very end.
It's all good. Here's the deal. I'm going to throw this out there so anybody can respond. So give me everybody on the screen together, and I know I'm about to drive the control room crazy, but I'm going to set this up this way. In 2011, Ohio passed an onerous voter suppression bill. The folks said we need to put this on the ballot in 2012. So they need to collect at least 300,000 confirmed signatures. So Congresswoman Marsha Fudge, former president of Delta Sigma Theta, she asked me to moderate the Divine Nine panel at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, ALC. I said, not a problem. So I'm standing there, and I asked all the presidents. Everybody's talking about all the voter registration drives and blah, 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 blah. And so I bring up this thing in Ohio. And then nobody was aware of it. And so Congresswoman Fudge, she looks at me, and she's telling me to move on. I go, no, we stand right here. And so I'm pressing. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is they're like, man, he going way too hard. So then Cynthia Butler McIntyre, the Delta president at the time, she says, well, she was head of the Divine Nine, and so she's the panel in the council. She said, we're going to meet tomorrow. We already meeting tomorrow, and so then we're going to come back with an answer for you. And they met the next day, and this is what they discovered. They discovered that there were 120 Divine Nine chapters alone in Ohio.
All right.
So if the Divine Nine said every chapter is responsible for getting 1,000 signatures, the Divine Nine alone would have been responsible for 1/3 of all signatures needed. Alicia Reese right now has been trying to get a ballot initiative in Ohio to guarantee the right to vote. The only organization that has actually made it their official state action is Alpha Kappa Alpha. I'm throwing this out because what I keep trying to get to with our black organizations, you have infrastructure, but if infrastructure is only activated for our meetings and for us for step shows or for what's internal, then the black community actually never sees us, and they rightfully should question, what are we doing? So if they see black and gold and don't know why everybody is wearing it, or see pink and green or red and white or purple and gold, if they say, I don't even know who those folks walking over there in those colors, that is a problem for us.
And Roland, this is Reverend Barber, and I want to say something that Hill just said, strategy. And what you're talking about is using this infrastructure and recognizing that our organizations were born to be about social change. Sometimes will become just fellowship organizations. And what you're saying is that we have to look at strategy. Yes, it's one thing to be in the street for a protest, but the protest and the mourning, and I've been arrested 14 times, so I know about that. But you have to turn it into policy. You have to turn it into power. And there are three things on that. Number one, you cannot then have black people in office who the people are marching for fundamental change, and they only put up bills that's just a little bit of change, because that pours water on the actions in the street. Number two, you have to be careful in this society of letting the society point at one person being the problem rather than the system. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say something. Trump ain't the ultimate problem. Hold on. Let me remix that. Trump is a iconography of a too often repeated American reality. That's what Neil Painter said out of Princeton. Before Trump was elected in 2010, since 2010, 26 states passed racial voter suppression laws. And they went at from the bottom, the city councils, they went after the legislature. The worst problem we have, and to some degree, is McConnell. That's why we need to be targeting Trump and McConnell. I know we're nonpartisan. I'm talking history. I'm not talking partisanism. I'm talking about in policy, because in some ways, as Ibram Kendi says, the person who does the loudmouth racism is the distraction. The folk you got to watch are the ones that underneath that are institutionalizing and making policy. The third thing I wanted to say is that when we talk about where we are in this particular moment and why we keep expanding, we need to expand our vision so that we can be engaged. We are in the midst, we keep talking about death. Watch this. Voter suppression, Roland, is a matter of life and death. What do you mean? When you suppress the vote, you allow people to get elected who then block healthcare. Blocking healthcare kills people. When you suppress the vote, you allow people to get elected who cover up for police, who allow the violence to continue. That causes death. So we need to look at the death measurement in every piece of public policy. And lastly, in the first Reconstruction, they did two kinds of strategy. They had a state strategy and a federal strategy. So all of the southern states passed equal protection laws before the 14th Amendment was passed. But by them passing it at the state level, they then demanded it at the federal level. Right now, we need all of the mayors and all that to do what they're doing. But why do cops, violent cops, racist cops kill people? Because they know they will only get tried at the state level. We need a federal law that can kick in and try people at the federal level for murder, so that the person knows that they will be tried for the crime they do. The Klan killed people in the South because they knew they would only get tried at the state level and there would be no double jeopardy. We need a federal law as well that will try people for murder. That's why we need both and not either or.
Anybody can jump in. Who wants to be next?
Roland.
Bobby Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're doing. The Justice and Policing Act will make it possible to prosecute on the federal level. But I don't want to get into a debate as to whose fight is stronger. It's like saying you got the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. You need them all. You don't have people in the Air Force saying we're better than the Army. We don't need the Army. Now we need everybody. And so we need people in the street creating the situation. But we also need elected officials, and elections have consequences. Keith Ellison, for example, used to be a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. He ran for Attorney General in Minnesota and got elected, a close election, right after he took over the prosecution in the George Floyd case. The first officer's charges were enhanced, and the other three got elected, got arrested. What would have happened if he had lost that close election? You just wonder where we'd be today. And so elections have consequences. If we don't win this presidential election and put somebody in there that's going to put people on the Supreme Court that will support voting rights, it'll be virtually impossible to win a voting rights case for the next 30 years. Elections have consequences. And so if we're talking about voter suppression, you got the Supreme Court, you got what the states are doing, you got to fight it at every level. And so we need people in office. We need people in the streets. We need people thinking, doing the think tank to come up with the ideas. But everybody needs to be in this battle. We have enough people involved. We have, you mentioned the Divine Nine and that power. But we need to make sure we're fighting on every level. And one of the main things we can't get diverted from is the fact that we have an election in November, not only, as Reverend Barber pointed out, not only for president, but U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate has been confirming judges that the ABA has deemed unqualified. The only qualification they have is they're going to roll back voting rights. We need more people in the House and the state legislatures. If you just notice what happened with the 2119 in the state Senate and 5149 flipped from Republican to Democrat, all of a sudden we could pass the minimum wage this year. We passed, instead of voter suppression that they've been passing for several years, they passed making it easier to vote. A lot of legislation that couldn't even get out of subcommittee was passing because people turned out and voted. But they also had to protest to set up the scene. So everybody's in this battle doing the best that they can do. And so Reverend Barber has pointed out some of the things that need to be in the legislation. I think everything he mentioned is in this bill. It was written by the Congressional Black Caucus. We have the votes to pass it in the House. And we need, if they're not going to pass it in the Senate, we need people in each of the states that have a U.S. Senate election to make sure their senator is held accountable for what they did on this legislation.
If I can jump in, Brother Martin, do I have time?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hey, Roland, I want to jump in too. You got time?
Okay. No. So go ahead. Phillip, then Hill.
Yeah. Respectfully, Brother Scott and to the other elected brothers, I understand. Maybe not, maybe it's not conveyed and maybe I don't seem like it, but I understand the great weight that you all have with your jobs and I have a great respect for you all's positions. But the 8 Can't Wait and the Justice and Policing Act are not reflective of the demands that people are talking about on the street. These are good piecemeal. These are good gap fillers. These are good things. And I agree they are different and they will move us forward. But I don't want us to rest on that. I think going back to Brother Roland's question, the Brotherhood has gotten comfortable. The Brotherhood has gotten quite comfortable with the conditions. And yes, this is an overgeneral statement. We have young brothers, we have older brothers, we have brothers internationally. But on the whole, we've got to really reckon with the fact that our fraternities and our sororities are becoming atrophying institutions because they do not reflect the conditions of people who are on the ground. And I know that because I'm 35. I'm actually a bridge person. I consider myself. I'm not the youngest. I can't be out till 3, right? But I'm also not as seasoned as some of you brothers on here. And what we are hearing consistently from people on the
well, I'm 51, Phil. I can still be out to 3.
Well, brother, sometimes. Sometimes.
I just want to have a little levity there. Go ahead,
I forgot where we were. I forgot where we were. I forgot you know me.
Tell it all.
I forgot you know me, brother. But what I want to say is not to condemn Brother Scott and Brother Mayor, but to also, I have to, my role on this panel is to say that those pieces of legislation are in some ways antithetical and in other ways do not go far enough to getting the real change that people want to see from their policing. I do agree with the assertion that defunding the police is also another way of saying that we need massive investment in food, jobs, housing, healthcare, education in our communities, and that money should come from the oversized budgets of police. But we say defund the police because we are speaking to an indictment of an institution that is rotten to its very core, is only accountable to wealthy people, and no matter what measurements we put in, that therein still it will be, no matter how many adjustments we make to Alpha Phi Alpha, there is still a core, still a thing that we are, a nexus, a reason for being that will remain unscathed and unchanged. And that's what we're seeing with the institution of policing. And I think if brothers...
So what are you advocating? I mean, be more specific, and then what are you saying that people then are asking for?
Sure. I think you are actually on the path, brother. People are asking not tomorrow, but for the police department. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we've been using the police department for all manner of things that it should have no business involved with. And so the demand and the question is to be thinking with a North Star towards eliminating the need for police as a mechanism of safety. So as Brother Barber was saying, we cannot divorce the policing system without talking about the society that they are built to run. And so all of those other things, and Brother Mayor, you did bring it up. I don't want to belie the point that you that you did bring this up, but we've got to have a North Star, and that North Star is providing basic necessities for every person, including and especially Black people. And when you see, I live in Miami, Fisher Island, they have safety, right? And in Liberty City, they have police.
So I want to jump in here, and again, hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. I just want to. Hold on, Mayor. I'm gonna come right. Mayor, hold on. I'm gonna come right to you. I want to unpack a little bit more what Phil is talking about. So when I hear defund the police, and Senator Kamala Harris was on my show, and others, what they're saying is so many resources going to the police, but we have mental health problems in our cities. We have other different issues in terms of. So the question then is, are we using police in schools to serve as a school to prison pipeline, or are we actually using them to de-escalate, providing safety, but also encouragement in those schools? So looking at our funding, looking at that totally different and saying, well, you know what? If I've got mental health issues, Kajima Powell, brother who was shot and killed 16 seconds when the cops arrived, the brother in Dallas who was killed within 30 seconds, saying, okay, is it possible that we can send mental health advocate out with the police when confronted with one of those situations? That's what I hear with defund the police, not get rid of them completely. Mayor, real quick, then Hill. Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We have asked, systemically, we have asked police to do everything. When I came in as mayor 4.5 years ago, even before George Floyd and many of these other things, what I said to the people in this city is that we have overlooked and ignored neighborhoods for decades. We have literally starved them to death. And that's where the pain is. And now we need to look at these communities as neighborhoods of opportunity. So we need to invest in a material way in these communities, quality schools, quality parks, economic business, job opportunities, healthcare, access to quality healthcare, a whole list of things that we label as building complete communities. And so that's where the focus needs to be. I grew up in one of those communities. I still live in the same hood in which I grew up in. And so what I said to people, if we invest in these communities in a real way, then when a flashpoint comes, people will be more willing to give you time to move even further, but they want to see the investments. I also said, as a mayor, I don't need to come in as an incrementalist, because when you're an incrementalist, the little things you see, people don't see it at the end of the day. We need to be transformational in our thinking and transformational in our execution. So I agree with you. People have been waiting for a long time, way too long, to see material, substantial, transformational change in their communities, in their neighborhoods. And that's where the dollars need to be in a very real way.
Hill Harper.
Thank you, my brother.
Hill Harper, I think Hill, then I think Freddie. Hold on, Hill, then Freddie. Hill, then Freddie.
Okay, I just wanted to jump in and obviously go talk about what Phil had to say, Brother Phil. And all due respect to the elected officials, listen, it takes a lot of courage, a lot of work, and a lot of difficulty to put yourself out to get people to cast ballots for you. Here's the problem, is that most elected officials, including the brothers here, who I respect, know the right things to say. So everything you said, Brother Mayor, you just said everything correctly. The thing is, though, is for true systemic impact and change, it has to be significantly more radical to even get back to the beginning. You know as well as I do, if you're negotiating a deal, you have to start way out here even to get back to here, because it's going to pull you back. And so most elected officials, particularly ones that call themselves progressives, always start way too low. Way too low. And here's the problem with that. What starts to happen is you start to see, if I post on my social media, vote, a litany of comments from young people saying why. And Brother Scott said, hey, voting matters. Without question, Brother Scott, who's in office has impact. However, since the people that they've been putting into office, they see such little incremental change and change from the standpoint that if within a year or two can be completely eliminated, that's not systemic change. And that's what people want.
So we
in
agree.
law school, we talk about fruits of a poisonous tree, right? You can't just talk about bad apples and say, we're going to do a little piecemeal work here. We're going to make sure we're going to clean it up. We're going to put the funding here and here. If the tree is, you have to pull the tree out, replace the tree with a new tree or something completely different. Maybe a tree doesn't even need to be there at all. So what does that all mean? It means, for instance, if you're really committed to this idea of community policing, Brother Scott, that you had mentioned, or Brother Mayor, for instance, you all have the federal power of incentives, and you could say that every jurisdiction locally, if not every single employee, for instance, I do a lot of stuff in Detroit. That's my, I love Detroit. I live there. I got a business there. So, for instance, if you looked at the majority of employees that work in the city of Detroit, a lot of them don't live there, right? A lot of them live somewhere else, like most of the cops live out in the suburbs, come in and police, right? So if we make a rule federally as well as locally that says, if you're going to get a check from the city, because the people who are paying taxes are paying your salary, you have to live in the jurisdiction. You have to. And if you're going to get money from the federal government, you have to have all city employees living in that jurisdiction. That would be a fundamental shift that would make people very angry, because there's many people who are living off the backs of Black people's taxpayer dollars that have no interest in those folks in Detroit or wherever, name whatever city, actually advancing, because they're spending their money that they get from these Black people out in the suburbs like Bloomfield Hills and paying taxes out there, not living here.
Freddie Haynes.
For police, etc.
Freddie Haynes.
And I think that the idea of let us know how we can empower you all elected officials to be more radical.
Freddie Haynes.
How can we help you be more radical rather than piecemeal work? I want to help you be more radical. I want to protect you in your radicalism. I want you to push. And I want to be there to support you in pushing. I'm not just saying it's on you.
Right.
But
I want to hold tight, Hill. I want to bring in Freddie.
I appreciate it.
Hold on, Bobby. Hold on. Congressman, hold on one second. Hold on. Freddie, Congressman, 1 second. Freddie Haynes, then Congressman Scott. Freddie Haynes and Congressman Scott. Hold on, Congressman, hold on. Congressman Scott.
And a Republican president ready to veto whatever you do, it's hard to get things done. And so, we need voter registration drives. We were, as I said, if you're interested in voter suppression and defeating voter suppression, one of the things that we need to do is get a Supreme Court that'll stop rolling back voting rights. Right. And let me tell you, if this administration is reelected, they'll have the Supreme Court rolling back voting rights for the next 30 years.
Got it.
Now we can be as radical as we want to be talking, but that's what we need to do. Another thing, you're talking about policing. I've been for about 15 years been promoting the Youth Promise Act, and Hill, you've been very helpful in that, coming to things. But we got that actually enacted in the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act and in the Every Student Succeeds Act. We got it in law. The administration won't implement it, along with the Destined Custody Reporting Act. That's law. They won't implement it. We need votes to change the executive branch so they'll implement some of the stuff that we've actually gotten passed. But we're doing the best we can.
Right.
There's always a question whether you want us to talk or whether you want us to get stuff done. If it's getting stuff done, it's getting it done with what the country has sent us to work with. Some of them are sent there to undo anything we're trying to do, and we just do the best we can getting bills passed. Now we can be radical. You can be for a single payer healthcare plan and get nothing. That's what happened in '93 and
Congressman Scott, hold on 1 second. Hold on. I need everybody to hold on. Freddie Haynes. Hold on. Dr. Barber, 1 second. Dr. Barber, hold on. Dr. Barber, hold on. Freddie Haynes has been waiting more than anybody else. Freddie, go. Dr. Barber, you're next. Doctor, hold on. Dr. Barber, hold on. Freddie Haynes, then Dr. Barber. Freddie Haynes, go.
And I'll come in after Brother Barber.
Gotcha. All right, so Freddie Haynes,
So
Dr. Barber, Greg Carr, go.
Thank you for doing this. I just want to say this, that if we're not careful, we're missing a major point that Roland was questioning us about. Right. And that major point has to do with the coordination of our infrastructure. If we have a coordinated an infrastructure that coordinates with a common vision, the good news is we can empower you, Congressman Scott.
I agree.
And
I agree.
to do
I
that
agree.
with radical, because we all recognize that most of our politicians preside over systems and structures that were built by white supremacy. And so if you're not careful, you'll end up bringing your Black face to presiding over a system that perpetuates white supremacy. So what we want to do is empower you to dismantle those systems. And when you do it radically, it means you get to the root. That's why we keep talking about the fact that the policing system is rooted in the slave patrol. So you have to uproot that which keeps producing this toxic racist fruit. So in helping you to do that, again, we get back to what Roland is challenging us to do, and that is to have a coordinated response with our already existing and powerful infrastructure, and recognizing how powerful that infrastructure is. We watched in this nation what the lack of a coordinated response will do when it comes to dealing with COVID-19. Whatever else you want to say, we got 100,000 people plus who have been, Roland has got going, as well as the Black church, as well as our Black businesses. But the sad reality is we never came together for coordinated response. I think it was Mary McLeod Bethune who says, if I hit you with one finger, I may not get your attention, two perhaps, but if I bring the fingers together and form a fist, that's a coordinated response. I can strike a blow. I can win the fight. And we're not winning the fight because we're not coordinated. We have a National Medical Association, and yet there was no coordinated response when we saw COVID-19 disproportionately kicking our behind in the Black community. No coordinated response. We have a National Bar Association, and yet where is the Bar Association in a coordinated response when it comes to disrupting this policing system that, again, is attacking and killing us? We have an infrastructure, but the infrastructure does not have a common vision. The infrastructure on top of that does not respect the fact that we were all born, as Bishop Barber so brilliantly said, all of us were born resisting the oppression that was existing. And now we become content to compete with one another and then party with one another instead of going back to our rootage. And in our rootage, we were guilty of standing against these systems, but we got to do it in a coordinated way. The Ohio illustration that Willis gave is powerful. We had enough in Ohio to get it done. We got enough across this country to make some things happen along with our coalition partners. We can radically transform this nation. And we're saying to the mayor, we're saying to Congressman Scott, we want to give you the power to be radical unless you want to continue to provide a Black face over a white supremacist system.
Reverend Barber, then Greg Carr.
Yeah. One of the things I want to challenge the false dichotomy of radical versus getting stuff done. Because when our people are dying, for instance, in COVID, and they're dying because they're working, it is not radical to say we want to build paths that make sure they have health care, and make sure that they have living wages, make sure they have sick leave and unemployment. That's not radical, that's human. Now, will it be a fight? Sure. But then what we have to understand is we need people to recognize that it's not the street versus those in the legislature. It's actually how do you turn both the street into legislation? And then how do you organize and coordinate that? Let me give you an example. In Kentucky, they had a governor who was extreme. And one of the things we don't talk about is poor, Black or white leaders, the poor and low wealth. 140 million people, 43% of this country, 61% of Black people are poor and low wealth, and you hardly ever talk about it. And if you start talking about it with some Black folk, they would defend it by saying, well, I grew up poor. That's not what we're talking about. We're not coming at you. We're saying that 61% of poor Black people who are poor and low wealth. And we now know through a study that if you register 10% of those with white poor folk and with brown poor folk, that you can fundamentally change the election anywhere. That's not hyperbole, that's data from Columbia University that we had done. So in Kentucky, we saw this extreme government. We went in and organized in 5 counties in the mountain, Republican counties. 3 of them turned. Those coal miners began to work with folk in Louisville, white coal miners with black folk in Louisville. The governor won, and the night that he won, he gave homage to the campaign for teaching him to get out of the left versus right, radical versus doing something argument, and start looking at what's right versus wrong and doing right by the people and connecting poor and low-wealth people. So one of the things we've got to do is we've got to reimagine what we see as the politics of the day. And I would tell you, I've talked to presidential candidates and others that tell people running, Roland, don't talk about poor. Poor folk don't do this. Let me tell you something. There are 100 million people that didn't vote in the last election. 100 million. Trump won by 80,000. Why didn't a lot of those 100 million people vote? Well, we've been out in the street, Phil and others, they didn't vote, not because folk didn't win certain arguments, because they never hear their condition. They hear middle class, they hear social Darwinism from Republicans, they hear neoliberalism sometimes from Democrats. What would happen, for instance, in the 13 former Confederate states, among which Texas is one, there are 75 million adults living in poverty and low wealth. There was a 4 million vote margin of victory in the Senate races in those states. There was a 4.6 million vote margin for the president in those 13 states. And there were 26 million voters, poor and low wealth, who did not even vote. We have to reimagine how can we radicalize the language, or call it transformation if you don't like radical, or call it reconstruction, whatever it is, so that what happens is it's not those who are radical versus those who get things done. I come out of electoral politics. I learned how to win. I worked for a white governor that won 16 years in North Carolina and whatnot. So, but the question is, what is the moment calling for? What is the moment calling for? And if, in fact, this country is wrestling with death, then it is time for us to have a politics that takes on death and looks at the death that is caused by public policy and then put a face on that death. What has us in the street now? The face of George Floyd. So what we've got to do is put a face on public policy, a face on the denial of health care, a death measurement on the denial of living wages. That's what the Poor People's Campaign is doing. That's why on June 2020, you won't hear a lot of people this Saturday pontificating about the poor. I'm not even going to do a big speech. It's going to be poor and low wealth people counterintuitive who are saying there are 5 issues we have to deal with: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, which is where the money really is if we want to redo our communities, and the false moral narrative of white evangelicalism. And if we put a face on that, we're going to give you all the faces and the power, the tears, but we're also building power by looking at every county and every district in this country where if you register 10 to 15% of poor and low wealth people around an agenda, they can fundamentally shift the politics of this country, even in the South.
Greg Carr. Greg
Carr.
Roland, Greg, hold on. Hold on. Congressman Scott. Congressman Scott. Congressman Scott. Hold on. Greg Carr's been waiting. Hold on. I got to go to Greg Carr. Then I'm going to come back to you. Congressman Scott, I'm coming back to you. Greg Carr, go ahead. Greg Carr, go ahead. Congressman Scott. Congressman Scott. Congressman, 1 second.
Their interests, those bills never would have passed. That money could have been spent on people who actually needed it. And there's a stark contrast. We've heard talk about on the job. There's a stark contrast of what we're doing with people who are infected on the job with the coronavirus. There's a Democratic position and there's a Republican position. Democratic position, I've been in the lead trying to make sure that OSHA comes in and has enforceable regulations to protect people from getting infected in the first place. We have hazard pay, so they'd get extra money if they're working in dangerous positions. If they get it on the job, in the HEROES bill that has already passed the House, they'll get a presumption of workers' comp so that the bills will be paid, lost wages will be paid. Treatment is covered with no copay and deductible. If you lose your job, you lose your insurance. We've got subsidies so you don't lose your insurance. and paid leave, all of that to make sure that people are protected on the job. The Republican position on the other side, what we're fighting, the only suggestion they made is if you can prove that it was the employer's fault, they don't have to pay anything. They get immunity.
Got it.
There is a stark contrast to what we've been fighting for and what they've been fighting for.
But it's not enough.
Absolutely right. And we've been able to get that passed in the House.
Greg,
So there is a significant difference in the way we're treating people and the alternative.
But let me echo what Reverend Barber has said in terms of how institutions fit with this. Reverend Barber, I remember when you all were doing Moral Mondays. At that time, I was a campus advisor for the Howard's NAACP, and we rode down one weekend. It's the first time I heard you speak many years ago. And when you talk about fusion politics, as a son in North Carolina, and think about, I've been rereading Helen Edmonds and H. Leon Prather and some of these cats dealing with what happened in North Carolina in the 1880s and 90s. And one of the things that seems to be clear, which kind of preceded the Wilmington racial terror of 1898, that fusion politics, people didn't have to like each other.
That's right.
You had these Black elected officials and these Black communities organized with these, in the Republican Party, and these disaffected white Democrats and these independents that came together for the fusion ticket. The reason it shook the core of white supremacists in North Carolina was that they realized that they didn't have to like each other to get power. And so, as I've watched you and listened to you and you talk about this third Reconstruction, one of the things I think we have to do, not only as a people, but as an organization, as a set of organizations, is realize that there is a fundamental role to be played in terms of developing study. We have to study. Study precedes a lot of this, because a lot of these things we've been here before. The SNCC tensions with SCLC and other groups. We have to study so that we understand the mistakes we've made and the successes we've had. What segregation did was force us together in a way that allowed us to really organize our institutions, and out of those independent, in many ways, institutions, insert ourselves into politics. We don't have that anymore. So that when I look at, for example, the Deltas, who I think do probably as good a job as anybody or better in the Divine Nine with their political action, my dear sister Ajwa Batwe Asmoa, I go down to Delta Days on the Hill at her bequest, and I see these sisters in there, and then they spread out all over the country and do what they have to do. I'm looking, I'm saying, where is the council in the Pan-Hellenic to really trade experiences and figure out how to fine tune and then expand and build on the things Roland is talking about? And Brother Hill, I was in law school, I guess around the same time you were at Harvard. I was at Ohio State, and I remember when they started the Federalist Society. I went to school with cats that are on the federal bench, including some of the courts of appeals, and they didn't say nothing to us. We didn't know what they were doing. But see, the way this works is out of your independent base, you strategize, you study your past failures, you study your successes. And then as you got that form, you then inject yourself in the trajectory of what's going on beyond. I'll end with this. Phil, you said something earlier, man, about this question. Capitalists don't like chaos. Well, sometimes they call it disaster capitalism because they have a plan. Naomi Klein is talking about this Green New Deal right now. I'm very concerned in terms of education, because these capitalists are looking at the structure of what we think of as a country. They're really in a country at all. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, how can we extract value from this situation? This is not a nation. It is a settler state with a number of different nations in it, and everyone advances their interests either individually or in coalition politics with others who share interests. So Reverend Barber, when you start talking about the poor people's campaign, you're saying, okay, like Stacey Abrams told them in Georgia, look, why wouldn't you vote to expand Medicare if I told you that you give me $1, I'm gonna give you $9 back? Well, you don't have to like me, but we've got to deconstruct. Talk about deconstructing, uprooting the tree. The tree is this country. And you got to deconstruct the national myth that we are one people. And once you've deconstructed that, you then intervene on behalf of those who are at the most risk, because it's moral, because it's principled, but you don't do it with the idea that somehow we're going back, to use Lincoln's phrase, to the mystic chords of memory to make this country be true to its principles. There were never any principles. This is a zero-sum game, and our people have made advancements when our independent institutions, from that base, we have intervened, and either in coalition with others or without others, and that's really the space that allows us to weaponize everybody everywhere, elected officials, independent actors, but our institutional bases have to be strengthened again. And when it comes to the Divine Nine, I think what we have to do now is get together, trade techniques with each other, and develop these spaces where we can study what we've done before so that we don't keep having this conversation, because our people are going to take the L in this thing as it moves into the next cycle otherwise.
All right, folks, here's the deal. Wait. Here's the deal. We literally have 11 minutes. So what I'm about to do is there are 8 people. There's 6 main speakers, and we're going to hear from our executive director and our president, Dr. Ward. So I'm going to give each one of you 1 minute to make whatever you want to say in your 1 minute. And so I'm going to start bottom right, and I'm going left. So I'm going to Mayor Sylvester Turner out of Houston first.
Thanks, Roland. Look, I agree with what I've heard. I don't think we are disagreeing, whether it's radicalism, whether it's transformation, whether it's deconstruction, and whether it's fundamental change. What's important from my perspective here in the city of Houston, for example, as the mayor of this city, is that I've got to do everything in working with our partners here to bring about fundamental radical change that will positively impact the people in these communities and these neighborhoods that have been overlooked and ignored for a long time. That's my commitment to them when it comes to housing, when it comes to quality education, when it comes to enhancing their quality of life, when it comes to the environmental racism that's in many of these communities, providing economic and job opportunities, good sound infrastructure, the things that will benefit them so that they don't have to feel as though they have to leave their neighborhoods and go someplace else. Every community is important. Every person in these communities have value. And it's not about funding a police organization to patrol, police, and incarcerate them, but it's about giving them an opportunity. My job as mayor, as the CEO of this city, is to come in and in a radical, transformative way to change their life such that it is much, much better by the time I leave here. That's my goal. And it takes all of us working together to make it happen. The people on this street, those protesters, I applaud them. I walk with them, agreed with them. So I hear you. I don't think we're disagreeing. I look forward to working with brothers and sisters in this city and across this country to bring about that fundamental radical change that will improve people's lives for the better.
All right, that's a great 2 minute and 2 second, 1 minute mayor. My mayor of my hometown of Houston, Texas. I appreciate it, Mayor Sylvester Turner.
Roland. I'm sorry.
It's all good. Now, my pastor, when I lived in Dallas, Reverend Dr. FREDRICK Haynes III.
Hey, thank you so much for doing this, Roland. I appreciate you and your leadership and your history lessons that you continue to give us. I simply say this: we cannot miss what Dr. King referred to as the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. A perfect storm has gathered, and we have an opportunity right now to accomplish a few things. Number one, we have an opportunity to have a coordinated response whereby we insist on using our political power in order to bring about a Marshall Plan for communities that have been deprived, that have been discriminated against and dissed. We need a Marshall Plan. This country was able to rebuild cities in Europe after World War II that they felt they had destroyed. We can do that and insist on that. Again, it takes moral imagination and courage to do something like that. That is fusion politics, calling for a moral imagination that says we need a Marshall Plan for our communities, and we need a vision of wellness and wholeness, what that looks like. This particular virus has exposed, as Bishop Barber says, the fissures, the breakages in society. And of course, we are right there in those fissures. We need now a moral vision of what wellness and wholeness looks like. And when you combine that with a Marshall Plan that we push for, we can take advantage of this zeitgeist and bring about this third reconstruction that we have been set up to be a part of.
All right, then. Great 1 minute and 34 seconds there, Freddie Haynes. Let's go to my man, author, activist, Hill Harper.
Hey, I'm gonna be real quick because I want to hit that 1 minute. Listen, everybody on this, I will work with you and support you in whatever I can, and I'll use my platform and resources to support you. And I would just ask the same when I come at y'all, because there are things that we're working on around economic empowerment and actually creating cross-generational wealth and living wage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Reverend Barber, I appreciate the work you do so much. I love hearing you talk, and I just think that you are a leader, and you are outstanding. One thing I will say quickly in 30 seconds, we often want to educate white folks about racism, but we as Black people have to think about, I put racism in 3 different categories. There are racists, there are anti-racists, and there are non-racists. We got too many Black people out there, particularly professional Black folk, that fall into that non-racist category, that are like, if I'm okay, I'm gonna be all right. If me and mine are all right, I'm gonna be all right. Rather than being anti-racist, which is actually actively figuring out how to fight systemic racism, systemic poverty, etc. Too many Black folks are non-racist. They don't want to admit it. They never would, but we need to convert them into anti-racists.
And you did 1 minute and 10 seconds. Yeah, Reverend Dr. Barber.
All right, can I get 10 seconds to stand up?
Reverend Barber, do what you want to do.
First of all, I just want to say that in history only changes 4 things: pandemics, war, environmental disasters, and mass social movements. And we have all of them going on now. This is a zeitgeist moment. Number 2, I want to say www June 2020. If you want to see an agenda and a budget and people coming together in moral fusion, join us digitally on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, June 2020. And what I'm talking about, you will see it in actuality. Number 3, in this moment, my greatest fear is we ask for too little. My greatest fear is we ask for too little, and we don't have a moral imagination that's big enough for the moment, and we miss the moment. Number 3, you cannot say, and I love all my people, but we had 3 Black women PhDs in epidemiology and public health, and all of them said the 3 bills passed in Congress during COVID and the 4th bill far short. Don't have time to debate it, but if you think bills that gave 84% of the money to corporations are going to help the 61% of Black folk that are poor and low wealth, then I have several things I want to tell you. And that's not being ugly, that's being true. That's not being radical, that's being Jesus. Because the God that I follow, that Black Palestinian Jew, said that if you don't treat the poor right, you don't treat the homeless right, you don't treat the immigrants right, you don't treat the sick right, I don't care if you're Black or whoever you are, you're going to be judged for that. And right now, this nation is under judgment. And the reason this pandemic is having so much problem is because when it hit, we did not seek to close the fissures that were caused by systemic racism and poverty. Instead, we did neoliberalism and we gave the money to the corporations, and people signed off on it. And too many of our people signed off on it. I say that not with deep criticism, but with deep love, because finally, if we're not going to address systemic racism and systemic poverty and ecological devastation and the war economy and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism seriously, transformatively, and reconstructively, then let me ask this question, and I know I'm a preacher: what the hell are we living for? That's the question I gotta ask.
Mayor Turner, you off the hook. Reverend Barber went longer than you did. So you all good.
that was 1 minute and 10 seconds.
That was 2 minutes and 13 seconds. Congressman Bobby Scott.
But the pastor had to say.
Congressman Bobby Scott. Hold on, Congressman, you're muted.
Yep, thank you.
Now you go.
Thank you, Roland. Thank you for putting it together. We've been working as hard as we can with an agenda. It may not be radical enough, but we passed the minimum wage to increase people's wages. We passed the PRO Act so they can negotiate for better wages. We've reported out a committee and trying to get the college affordability bill passed, which will make it possible to go to college without incurring debt. We're fighting discrimination with legislation and housing policies to help people own homes, which creates wealth. In policing, we've got a good bill that will hold police accountable. We're fighting to implement the Youth Promise Act, which will take money out of the criminal justice system and into the community. But a lot of the progress we're going to make will depend on the election. To the extent that we can get people to vote and vote their interests. And if poor people can vote, not with the wealthy, but with the poor, we can elect a legislature that will pass all of these bills we've been able to pass in the House. The last bill was $3 trillion. 99% of it is to help the people, the average man and woman in this country. And it's going to depend on the election. The voting rights and everything else depend on the outcome of this election. Alpha Phi Alpha, about 100 years ago, developed a campaign, a voteless people is a hopeless people. And we're going to see that in effect in November. If we vote right, we'll be very hopeful. And if we vote wrong, it's not going to be pretty. Voteless people is a hopeless people. And so thank you, Roland, for bringing us together.
Thank you very much for keeping that under 2 minutes, Congressman Bobby Scott. Appreciate it. Philip Agnew.
Yeah.
My brother.
Black women are facing many, many wars, and we can end one of them if we work on the brotherhood. We know that Black men are under a great amount of pressure externally and internally. We are taken away from our humanity. We are alienated from ourselves. And many times we're taking it out on our sisters. So if there's any word that I want to give, we have a lot of duty and a lot of work to do to talk to brothers about the way that we engage with our sisters, with our lovers, with our baby mamas. It starts when they're being initiated. We create predators, and we have a duty to be able to raise up a new generation of men that respect women. Inspired by my experiences with the fraternity and my experience while organizing, I launched an initiative with a number of brothers last Monday called Black Men Build. Brother Harper, Brother Scott, Brother Haynes, Brother Mayer, Brother Barber, Brother Ward. I am going to be reaching out to you all about this initiative. We're seeking to engage the world as an organized force for Black men. You can find more information at blackmen.build.
There you go. 58 seconds. Go ahead, youngest one on the panel.
Oh, no.
Greg Carr. Dr. Greg Carr. Greg, you up?
And,
I left you 2 seconds.
Very quickly, W.B. Du Bois, I would encourage folks to get a book called The Education of Black People. The last chapter in there is a speech that he gave at Johnson C. Smith.
You gave me that copy. You gave me that book.
Yes, indeed,
you,
I did. And Du Bois says this, our frat brother. He said these laws are going to change. Desegregation will come, and then you're going to have to decide what you're going to do in a society where if you don't define yourself, you're going to get run over. The global capitalist structure is collapsing. I don't expect the United States to be here in the future as long as it's been here in the past. And at the end of the day, if we do not make different types of choices, we're going to become fodder for whatever's coming next. This isn't an American conversation. It's a global conversation. It's a human conversation. At the end of the day, most of our people aren't in college, and most of them in college don't join fraternities and sororities. Leadership is earned. It is not inherited. So if we're going to do something in this organization, we better decide what it's going to be, and we better decide it fast. Thank you, brother.
Oh, look, you beat Phil. You were under his time. All right. John Paul, the executive director of Alpha Phi Alpha. Go ahead, brother.
Thank you, Brother Roland Martin, for using your platform to educate and enlighten the masses. And to my talented brothers, it's truly an honor to have you all here. This is exactly what the Jewels had in mind when they founded this organization 114 years ago on an Ivy League campus. They had no right doing that. They had the audacity to come together, 7 Black men on an Ivy League campus when most people couldn't even read. 3 sets of words: Black men vote. We need to make sure that we come out of our house and make our voice be our vote, make our vote be our voice. That's exactly how we move the needle. The next one, have no fear. There was one time that Black men that looked just like you and I would not be afraid of losing anything, even their jobs, and some even lose their lives because they didn't have any fear, because they weren't fighting for themselves, they were fighting for their future. If you don't have any kids, there are kids who need you. And so we need to absolutely use our voice and have no fear. The last one is never give up. I truly believe, and I've been listening to a lot of Martin Luther King speeches, MLK speeches, and I truly believe that one day we will overcome. And it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but just like they said, someday. Our actions will always speak louder than words, and I have to plug the frat. If you're not following us, please follow us on Instagram and all the other social media at APA1906. Thank you, Brother Martin, and thank you, my brothers.
35th General President of Alpha Phi Alpha, Dr. Everett Ward.
My brothers, thank you for an enlightening evening. There are a couple of things I want us to take away from this. Number one, as president of the Council of Presidents of the Divine Nine, I want you to know that we do have a strength. I heard loud and clear, Brother Harper, and to all of us, the Divine Nine, we are not against each other. We are for each other, and it's a collective power. And we have a strategy that we're going to implement, and we're going to use our partners all across the country, because the urgency of now demands that we be fully engaged as a collective body of the Divine Nine, representing 2 million members. And so we've got to be together. We are supporting the Poor People's Campaign on Saturday. We're going to be in the streets. And for our brothers and sisters who are marching, I applaud the marching. But what we've got to do is march to the polls on November the 3rd, because at the end of the day, we are not at each other, we are for each other. So we need our elected officials, we need our brothers and sisters in the street to have a protest to public policy agenda. And that's what it's all about. 1.8 million Black men didn't vote in the 2018 election. And now we got to make sure our brothers really go out and vote, because when you look in the mirror, at the end of the day, it's left up to us to protect and save our own communities. No one's going to do it for us. We got to do it for ourselves. So brothers, thank you for being here. This is the beginning. Brother Martin, thank you for your vision to broaden this discussion beyond the House of Alpha. And we'll continue to do all we can to move onward and upward together. Thank you, my brothers.
Folks, here are my final comments. In the movie The Untouchables, there's this great scene that exists between Kevin Costner and Sean Connery. And Kevin Costner wants to take down Al Capone. Sean Connery says, "What are you prepared to do?" Kevin Costner says, "I'm prepared to do anything within the law." He said, "Then what are you prepared to do?" He said, "When he puts one of yours in the hospital, you put one of his in the morgue. That's the Chicago way." I ask every single person who's watching, alpha, non-alpha, man, woman, doesn't matter, Christian, Jew, Gentile, doesn't matter. What are you prepared to do? See, it's real simple. It's real simple. Go ahead and pull the panel back up for me. It's real simple for the folks who are watching on YouTube, on Facebook, on Periscope, who are looking at all 9 men up here. It's real easy for the 7,000 people who are watching simultaneously right now to say, well, what's Bobby Scott going to do? And what are them preachers are going to do? And then, and what are these black mayors are going to do? What's the CBC going to do? But you got to ask the question, what are you prepared to do? So they've already laid out that, Congress is doing what they're doing. Then you got folks in state capitals doing what they're doing. Then you got county folks, and you got school board folks and city folks. But the question is, what are you prepared to do? What is happening in your house? What is happening in your family? What is happening with your neighbors? What is happening on your street? What is happening on your block? What is happening on your neighborhood? What is happening in your city? What impacts what happens in your country? What impacts in the world? See, it's real easy for folk to sit saying, man, we sure need this, and we sure need that, and it'd be great if we had this. See, I had a lot of people tell me the same thing. Man, it'd be great. Man, it'd be great if you could have a show. I had a show on TV One. It got canceled, so I launched my own. I didn't sit around saying what's Black Enterprise doing, and what's Oprah doing, and what Tyler Perry's doing, and what's Ebony doing. I said, no, if I have the capacity to do it, then I'm willing to actually do it. So the challenge for every single brother or sister watching is not to make excuses about what somebody else is doing, but what are you doing? Don't just say what's happening when it comes to black folks not voting if your family's not voting. Don't say, well, we need more of us registered if you haven't asked your aunt and your uncle and your cousins and your nieces and your brother and your sister and your parents whether they are registered. Don't wonder if the registration has expired. You do what's necessary to ensure that they somehow actually registered. What cannot happen is for this generation of black people to be gutless compared to our ancestors. You cannot tell me we come from a stock of people who knew they were involved in slavery, but they said we are going to somehow change the condition for our people. When you had black people who died just learning how to read during slavery, they did not say education did not matter. When you had black people who put their money together to create HBCUs to ensure their children were educated. And even when HBCUs like Hampton were created and they said we don't only want our kids knowing how to farm, they said challenge them, you better make sure they're doctors and lawyers. What I'm trying to say is this here. This generation cannot talk about Juneteenth on Friday, and you don't respect my alpha brother, the late Representative Al Edwards, who was the one who carried that bill across to make it a state holiday in Texas. When you got the governor of Virginia today announcing that Virginia is going to move forward to become the second state to do it. Now you got the NBA and all these companies now trying to give folk the day off for Juneteenth, and that's great. But the challenge for all of us is the question, what are we going to do in getting the game? The challenge for us is, are we going to actually use our dollars? Let me go ahead and say it. It's an abomination in Black America when 5% of graduates of HBCUs give back to their schools. You cannot have freed slaves who rub nickels and pennies together to ensure these institutions were created, and to have this generation of Black people be willing to write a check. Don't tell me you support your school wearing your letters and you go back for homecoming, but you don't send at least $50 back to your school to ensure the next generation has an opportunity. Don't tell me you care about Black entrepreneurs if you're unwilling to write a check to ensure you're supporting Black businesses. The sister who created these headphones, Mary Spio, Black company, Ceek.com. We support her on this show. Black Mama Tees, the sister who created her own vodka line, supporting her on this show. The litany of African Americans who have their own businesses, we're supporting them on this show. We have infrastructure, we have knowledge, we have all that we need. The question is, are we willing to actually use it? I'm not just going to fight white supremacy. I'm also going to fight lazy Black folk. I'm not just going to fight folks in D.C. or in state capitals. I'm also going to fight Black churches and Black preachers and Black educators and Black business leaders and folks to say, what are you prepared to do? The bottom line is this here. You've got an evil man sitting in the White House. You've got the late Dr. Conrad Worrell, who talked to me and Mark Thompson. 8 days before he died, he only had 15 minutes of breath in his body, and he said, I need Black folks to say, we got to put this man out. Judges, as Bobby Scott said, they want to have judges for the next 50 years control the federal judiciary. Everybody needs to understand we are in the fight for our lives, literally. We're walking around wearing masks because we're not trying to die because of coronavirus. And I say, like our frat brother, Vertner, Woodson, Tandy said, we will fight until hell freezes over, and then we will fight on the ice. It's time for some of y'all got to decide whether you prepared to fight. Folks, thanks a bunch for watching this special edition of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Roland.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, brothers.
Thank you, brothers.